Others that we had just left were much louder, but they weren't.
But some, yeah, some are quieter, it's just a perceived thing. And it's
It
like,
was-
there's also a possibility of the content of itself, if the speaker allows certain frequencies to get out that are, your ears are more sensitive to, that's a possibility too. There's
But it does come back to your perception of what you like and what you don't
I
like.
do think
right?
so, I do think so.
I mean, you cannot take that away from
No, I
people,
think that's
I don't believe, you know. It's maybe like Robert said, if you've been irritated once by a certain type of music, you're more sensitive to it.
Yeah, the irritation, the fact, there could be irritation to it, or there could be that you like it, you know.
You really like
or
it,
whatever.
you stand it at pretty high volume, right?
Right, you're willing to tolerate, yes?
I could pose a question. I mean, I understand we're talking about A weight and C weight and lower pitch, lower frequencies and bass in terms of just, volume and perceptions and establishing rules that are acceptable to people.
Right.
Is there any concern that this will somehow create a bias in favor or against certain kinds of music? And I ask that only because anyone who works in the recording industry or music field knows that certain focus on C levels and bass signal certain types of production. If you're doing modern R&B, or any modern black music, you will have those values.
Well, look, I can answer the question to some degree. I think that overall pop music in general has more bass. Overall music is composed based on a similar concept, and this is I might have mentioned this before, but at some point they went from in the classical period, they went from maybe chamber music, eventually went into this romantic period. The romantic period was because the composers were actually making music for the rooms, because they actually could structurally make rooms that were larger. They could create more sweeping patterns, that you could no longer play this highly intricate music because it just became a wash. So in that same sense today, we have access to subwoofers, very inexpensive, and it creates, and they're very high, very efficient. So music in general has this, and we do have the cult of loudness now, where now there's less and less dynamics in music, and overall you do have a lot more bass. So I think that in that sense, we may not be too much different between genres. However, I will agree also that some genres have excessive bass, but then some systems are set up to produce even more so that effect. So there's a combination of the system, the room, and the music, and the operator that can create more bass in some situations than others. And I would say this: if, as we talked about last week, if you want to do it that loud, if you want to have that much bass, then you have to take measures to limit the amount that gets out. That's all it is. It's not that you can't do that. It's just you can't do that to everybody else. Does that answer your question? I mean, to some degree.
I was just curious to know whether that was a concern that people were aware of.
Yeah, I think, well, it is a concern that, because nobody wants to be targeted, so we say, here's a number. And how you get to that number is your business. I think that would be it. And that's why we have to be careful about that. Yes? Hi.
Do certain genres of music have different dB level signatures? I mean,
You mean the ratio of C to A or whatever?
Yeah.
Well, that's sort of, we'll take more look at that, but I think that, yes, sometimes, but I think we're within a range. But if somebody's going to decide to have more bass than anything else,
Right.
and I can do that with my system on anything. I can do that with what is it? Was it with the Overture 1812?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
We can blow it out.
Yeah.
You could scare everybody to death in the whole neighborhood.
Because there is a social aspect to this, which I'm sure you've done in your research, that it goes back a couple hundred years to the drums in Town Square.
Sure.
There's a little bit of a dynamic at work there too.
Mhm. Well, again, there's no problem with people making as much sound as they want, but it's impact on everything else. And I sort of feel like the more you want to bring it up, the more you have to find ways to basically corral it. So again, it might fire off a whole nother genre of music that has no bass in it, right? Doubtful.
Can you go back to the chart of the measurements again?
Sure. Sure.
That's the one. And, look at those measurements, right? I think you were recommending 91, 101.
91, 101, right, which is...
91, 101. So the vast majority of those, and I think it was typical in the other blocks you measured, right? We're just a touch above that, right?
Right.
So if we all bought into your numbers, we're probably bringing the sound down a little bit.
Right.
But it's not ridiculously dramatic. And maybe, to Jude, maybe you as a club owner, those sort of numbers you could live with, right? 91, 101.
I really don't know the answer to that. I don't want to speak for everybody. There's a lot more operators out there than me, and I don't want to say that. I know that when I go back to the litigation that we have, and the person who's involved in litigation, we did some tests inside of his residence, and it was found that it did not start to bother him until we got to 96A and 105C. So, and he has a place that is completely not insulated. I mean, it's again, he likes the old storage. It's kind of a cool old world feel when you get in there. It doesn't want to insulate anything. So, I would think, just the way I see it is that he's getting penetrated more than any other physical structure could, because it's a really old building.
Well, what about the people who just walk by and watch it? I have to,
Is that what you're trying to regulate?
yeah, that as well, absolutely. Street noise and the volume that just goes up and up and up and up. Just because you aren't closed up in your residence doesn't mean that the volume of some of the urban street businesses isn't offensive.
Well, I think the perception of type of music plays into it also. I think you even quoted the DJ music is what we're trying to curtail, but I can tell you that when you're talking about New Orleans type music, I do Zydeco at a location, I have a horn section at a location, okay? And we have, it's very difficult to make money in some of these locations. They're very high rents. So you have to try and extend these lights as long as possible. On the A side, it's very hard to it's the horn section and the Zydeco. I have more trouble controlling the A with that music. Then when the DJ comes on, then it turns into, okay, then we're trying to control the bass. Which we're doing that right now, even though that's not even in the equation right now. But and the point is, it takes on the operation end, it takes us being able to do all these different things. Because nobody wants to listen to, even if they want to hear that live band, they're not going to come in there for 6 hours to listen to a live band. They want that change, and then bands have to take breaks. So we have to do both. We have live entertainment, then we have the DJ comes on, then we have live entertainment again, and then some DJ comes on again. So, I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I was looking to try and see if there's a consensus around that Dave's numbers are somewhat in the right ballpark,
And it also goes back to the end. I mean, when this changed in 2 of our studies. We went out one day and we said 91 at the door in the middle of the day, nothing, and it sounded offensive to and I wouldn't have even operating at that level because I didn't need it. Because all we're looking for is we're looking for a modest amount of filtration of sound out into the street. And to me, it was too loud. Then you come back and we did another walk a different time, and 91, it was completely absorbed by the crowd, and you could barely hear it. I mean, you could literally barely hear what music was being played in the middle of the street when we were at 91 because of the ambient noise.
I have a question or a response to that comment about the people, which I think goes to the residences as well. Trying to run the numbers on the amount of visitors there are a year and the amount of them like Bourbon Street as opposed to somewhere else and all that. I'm guessing that on a busy Friday night, maybe 10,000 people come through Bourbon Street.
It's about 9 million a year, and that's
$9
Waste
million
about
a year, $10 million a
$50,000,
year is going to be more. Some of them would rather go to the museum, but some of them like the open space. Now, we've been out there for hours and hours looking at those people. A lot of us have been in there. How many people do you think out of the 10,000 find Bourbon Street disagreeable and are still there?
Didn't seem that was too many of them.
No. What happens is
That's a
that
little bit.
9,999 of them like it, that's why they're there.
There are a lot of people who want to go to Bourbon Street and want to visit the French Quarter, and it has gotten so scary, loud, dirty, accepting of things that are, I've never seen before in the last few years. I lived in the quarter for a while, and I never saw anyone without clothes on anywhere other than Bourbon Street. Well, now there's a lady who stands outside on Jackson Square offering to take pictures for $10. And, you know, Bob, you and I have such a different idea of what's good about New Orleans. I don't think there's anything we'll agree on. I pay my taxes, I live here, I want the city to be elevated to an extent. And Bourbon Street has gotten so seedy that it's not. I realize you like that, and you thrive on that. I understand, we just don't
Stacy,
agree.
you're wrong. I don't like it. I don't go on Bourbon Street unless we're on these sound walls. I don't personally like it. I'm concerned about cultural legislation and classism. New Orleans, read Richard Campanella's book, has always had honky-tonk areas.
You
Always.
care about it.
From
you
before the
contribute.
last century.
You contribute.
Sorry?
You're not contributing, so
I'm not
you
contributing
believe
why?
in the seediness, and that's something that you want to protect.
Excuse me, what do you mean I'm not contributing?
We're not trying to protect seniors in any kind of way, because our revenue comes from people that are spending a lot of money. And I think for the people that want to come and aren't coming here, I would think that they're much more concerned about safety and possibly.
The condition of the street,
and
sanitation,
sanitation.
safety, all of
I
those
don't think
things.
people aren't coming to New
I mean,
Orleans,
Kim,
coming to Bourbon
you know,
Street because they're saying it's too loud, that's the reason why I'm not going. I think security and sanitation, I think those are
I
much
think those
bigger
are
reasons.
very important issues, I agree
Those are
with
bigger
you.
reasons.
Yes,
Kim, are you
Councilmember?
okay with, I mean, I know that FQMD has sort of positioned itself to be the arbiter of all quality of life issues. Is FQMD okay with the nudity for a price on Jackson Square?
The board has not, none of our board members or the board or any of the committees have addressed that. So
So how do you decide the things
But
that you
to
take on?
answer that question, we have addressed the idea of what we refer to as strippers in doorways, where we have girls who are working at topless clubs on Bourbon Street who appear in the doorways in a state of semi-undress. And the board passed a resolution about a year and a half ago to drop legislation to deal with that issue. However, I think the issue that you're talking about is the young women who are dressing in body paint. And the problem with that, as we see it, is that there are constitutional issues as to whether or not you have covered yourself if you're not doing it for a commercial purpose. I think when they get to the point where they're doing something for a commercial purpose, which depends on vulgarity or lewdness or display, I think that there may already be laws that would prohibit that. I think the idea of dressing up in nothing but body paint for the purpose of having people take photographs with you and pay you for that may be illegal right now.
Okay, so is FQMD going to take that issue on?
Well, at this point, I don't think the issue has become sufficiently widespread to raise itself to the level of...
What is
of notice.
widespread? How many naked women offering themselves for photographs?
I've only seen two, and
There's
So
three
two
of them
is not
posted
enough.
inside my building, I wish they were never there. They seem to be homeless. I mean, it looks horrible. They've been on the side,
if you're telling us
they've been
that
on the side of my
something that's come to your
building.
attention in
You
terms
know,
of...
the council set a deadline, and I think we're getting hijacked too.
Yeah, well,
This isn't even related to the issue of salary.
I think there's but it's probably pressing.
well, sounds like maybe we could move it to another FQMD meeting.
They're really quiet.
We shouldn't even talk about it in this forum, you're right.
Excuse me, I can speak for myself, Stacy. I don't like that kind of thing. I'm concerned about how you pass legislation that amounts to culture wars in classes. We've got to be
You're right,
careful.
it's a culture war. I am against that kind of behavior and you're not. And we just disagree.
No, I'm not. You haven't asked.
Can I ask, I'm sorry, could I finish? And then I'm gonna deal with sound, and then there'll be a break at some point, and then we can talk about, and you'll have a break, and then we'll do it for a little walk, so we can.
Let me ask you a question a little differently, perhaps,
Okay, great.
Came up with those
Thanks.
numbers.
Yeah, we certainly have an issue with what's an acceptable level, and I think that Councilmember Head made a point that maybe even that's too loud for the passerby, and we have some subjective observations from our sound walks that say, well, some people think this is okay. The question is, then I understand at this point that you're talking about what's right for Bourbon Street, and that's sort of what we're getting at here. Like, oh, I'm not necessarily saying
My
what's
question,
necessarily
Dave,
right.
It's going to be to you this. You came up with your recommendations before we did this recent set of sound walks.
Right.
Have you seen anything in this last recent set of sound walks that would cause you to want to change the recommendations you made previously?
I think our subjective analysis of it has, originally I was a little higher, but I have some safety factors in there. And so the safety factors are there to protect the residents that are nearby. And that's sort of what, so I sort of have to, I feel comfortable where it is.
Where it is.
Making it more restrictive may be difficult without getting a lot of resistance, and making it more liberal may put me closer to a zone where there may be problems that are unforeseen. So
The
although
only way we're going to know whether this is achieving what we'd like it to achieve is actually go do it.
right,
and experience it, because there's no way can you model this or do it mathematically. You
Right.
just have to go do it.
Right, I think
we're going to have
we-
to go get all the business owners, everybody else to agree. Let's go do this for a couple of months
yeah.
and see
Heidi?
what we get.
Yeah, I think,
I mean,
well,
I don't
I
see
think
it-
you're right that it needs to be, see what happens when everybody's in compliance, see what it's like.
See what it's like.
And I think you'll find that it's greatly reduced, and especially you won't have the severe overages that occur from time to time. And then that will make it a more stable environment for the residents, and it'll be safe, it's also for safety in the middle of the street, for emergency communication and all those things. So I think all this come together as sort of the how we're defining it. And that's, so I have several factors, and I think that that's achievable. So that's where I would say, yes, I do so.
I think one thing that needs to be noted also is that the two sound walks, on the Thursday night sound walk, there was no point in any block that we measured that it was impossible to have a conversation in the street, not just with one person, but with 3 or 4 people. On the Friday night sound walk, it was more difficult, but it was more difficult not because of the music from the clubs, but because of the level of the other people talking on the street, which also, I think, impeded your walkie-talkie communications as well.
Right. I will make another point about that is we do have a little bit of what they call a Lombard effect, which is people raise their voices to compete with the other sounds around them. And of course, with more people, there's more sounds. However, again, another reason to have a cap, and at least from my point of view, is that says, okay, you're not competing with anything over this
Right.
from these continuous
I guess
sources.
the chicken and egg thing, though, is it the public driving the music, or is it the music driving the public?
Well, again,
Yeah.
and I think Ms. Head pointed out the idea that you're desensitized over the course of an evening, exposed to louder sounds. I think that a number is a good place to start and to say, and then see how that works. I think overall you'll have it'll be a little bit quieter. It may get louder due to crowds. It may still be quite loud due to crowds, but then we're not going to be driving that even further by not having a limit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think there should be a limit.
Okay.
I'm just saying that, looking at the measurements we took that Thursday,
Right.
does that limit maybe need to be a couple dB higher than 91?
That may be up to discussion.
I remember when we went by Chicken Willie's, everybody thought Chicken Willie's was way too loud, but it was actually 88, 95, 88 A
Right, it was
and 95
considerably
Z.
quieter. But
Yeah, so it's, and everybody thought it was outrageously loud.
Right, it sounded loud, and I think it was just, so again,
I know, it's
you
a
know,
perception of what.
putting a line in the sand is sort of where,
You know, Chicken Willie's a good example of that one. In my observation of that business, it's all A, no C. And part of people's perception is if you have a crappy sound system, as
Right.
they do,
it's annoying.
it's annoying.
Right.
And so the levels are not really as relevant as the quality of the sound system. And in that case, it's a fast food place with bad sound, and it's annoying.
Right.
I didn't see them as loud, I didn't see them as annoying.
Well, you know, I think there's also how they equalize it. There are certain frequencies that we're going to be more affected by, and that we're more sensitive to. It turns out that we hear very well at as we get older, we lose the 3,000, 4,000 range, but that's the frequencies that a baby screams at, and we're the most sensitive to that. That's why, number one, they think that that's why, you know, we're able to hear babies. That's why we all survive this long. But then that's also why when you're on a plane and maybe it's not your child, you might say, "This is highly annoying," you know. But then if it's your child, it's the sound of life, right? That's what it is. So
What happens in enforcement when the crowds are 95, 98?
I think again, what we're talking about is with a sensible training of the health management group, they'll be able to distinguish that. And I was speaking with Paul Van Orden of Portland, and I think we talked about it a little bit before, but the human ear, he points us out, having done this for 25 years solo there, 33 years total, the human ear is capable of distinguishing quite a number of things. And a trained ear from the health department who has to deal with this day in and day out will be able to figure that out. And then we know that the people aren't making the low frequency sounds. So if we see a big difference between the C and the A, we'll know that the C is being created by another source. But if they're similar, and we can distinguish that that it's a lot of voice, then we know that it is primarily A, and that's it. So I think that we're going to find that. You see, I can measure a single tone, and if it's 1,000 hertz, it measures the same as C and A. But if I add in a low frequency tone, that kicks the C up, and the people aren't going to create that. So that's where we start to look at our limits. So we may not be. So they're going to have to know that. They're going to have to deal with it. But this is part of the process, right?
It's just a subjective thing, you're out there.
Well, the measure. I think these people will have. They're going to be educated. They're not going to be. You know, I don't think we're going to have just anyone out there, and we're going to educate them and train them and get them right. You know, so we can. And we have to learn over time. Sure, we're going to have to learn over time. This is a very complex situation on Bourbon Street, and sometimes it's very. You know.
And then I recall the salaries were pretty high. I mean, they were definitely salaries for people with skill.
I think it was like $30,000, $40,000.
No.
Well, I just pulled it down the other day. I don't think it was very high, but
And we've talked, the only reason why.
but maybe we can get more money.
You know, I've mentioned 100, but I was asking the morning might go away.
I
So that's the reason why
I understand.
asked
I
about
understand 100%. But if you have 100C and 100A at the same
Well,
time,
100A, it wasn't C.
right? But if you have 100A and 100C at the same time, then you know that the bar's not doing that. You know
Would
that.
would that be another factor?
Yeah, I think
That there has to be a 5-point difference, a 7-point difference between
I
the
think
two in order to be a violation?
I think that's the kind of thing that we'd have to be looking at as we get people trained. You know, because remember, the enforcement isn't happening right off the bat. We're going to look at compliance, and we're going to start seeing how that works. If we go through that period of self-compliance, I think we can really start to evaluate. People can start bringing their own information in and say, this is what I got. Okay, I think that all that's going to be valuable. But again, you know, it depends on the continuity of, let's say, the working on the project, or whether the project gets put down and then we just see what happens. So that's it. This was from the other night, just so we can see how this works. Here's the low frequencies over here, and here's our base frequencies again. And these little dots and X's and things represent what we hear sort of as a normal, like this sounds like the ocean, right? All these sound more or less an even sound across the frequencies, low to high. And what we see here is on the top. This is out in a club doorway. Okay, it's got a lot of low, and it's got a lot of everything in it, okay? And then we move to the middle of the street, and we still have considerable amount in the base region, but the rest of it's all dropping off quite nicely. And then as we get to, I think this is 132 feet away, the whole thing is dropped down. I mean, it loses much low, you can see that right here. It loses much, but the curve starts to come closer to this. We still have this issue, and again, another reason to concentrate on our control of low frequencies leaving our venue, so we minimize the amount of impact on this. Now, some of these were slides from earlier today in the housing and human needs. So the approach again is to measure the door, so we ID the source. We talk about a hard cap of A and C, however we do that, and a short measurement interval because it allows us to get through a good number of measurements in a short amount of time, and then gives us a chance to reevaluate things.
Just a comment on that, Dave. I mean,
Yes.
You weren't here last week at the last government meeting, but we had a long discussion about the 20-second measuring the time, and I think none of us really felt had any knowledge as to why that number was an appropriate number. But I think after Friday's walkthrough, it became very obvious, at least to me and maybe some other people on the walk, that it's hard to keep a consistent sound for 20 seconds. Well, I mean, there's people coming by screaming at the microphone, you know, after 15 seconds, you know, there's tourists in the street having a good time. So 20 seconds is a long time to stand there.
Right, and get something that's not interfered with.
It really couldn't be much longer.
Right, I think, and that's...
You may do multiple measurements, maybe.
Right, we do multiple measurements, and the reason we're using 20 seconds, that's sort of the standard
like
for capturing low-frequency sounds. We use that for a lot of standards.
Yeah, I
So-
mean, 20 seconds is about all you're going to get without
About all you're
an
gonna get.
extraneous event
Right.
on a busy night.
Right, now hopefully with the equivalent level, assuming the event is not a severe event at the end of the measurement, you're generally it's going to even out pretty well to what we overall perceive.
Right, we had discussed at our previous government meeting, perhaps, you know, setting up maybe 3 measurements in 5 minutes or 3 measurements in 10 minutes, or you know, putting some kind of a interval there with multiple measurements.
Mhm.
Yeah, because the extraneous thing is going to happen, but it doesn't mean it's an overall violation.
Mhm.
And songs are different, right?
Right.
Well, just to reiterate,
1812, you know.
To reiterate what the original recommendations were, 91 at the plane of the door, and then as we move to the middle of the street, it drops down to about 82 or 81. And if something from the opposite side of the street comes in, we add 3 to that number, so if it's 81 plus 81, you have 84 in the middle. And we found that we had levels that were around there. We were finding those levels in general around, and they were comfortable for communication in the street. So, and right now, we sometimes have levels in the area of 96, or we've measured 96 in the street. And that would be less than half as loud for what we'll call it the worst cases. Yes?
Oh, God, I feel like I'm going to be redundant here and ask the same question.
No, please ask.
Was this like measurement taken like on a quiet day where it goes down to like 81 in the middle of the street?
Well, no, I'm just saying that if we start the individual donation of the source, okay? They have a source, which is, let's say it's a venue, and then it has 91 at the door. That means that sound, by the time it gets to the middle of the
Yeah, I
street.
know, but what if the whole street is just crowded, jam-packed full of people? And
Right.
it's like a crowd standing right there at the door.
Right, well,
and they're making
remember,
noise.
and that's what June's asking about, is that's where we have, if it's that crowded,
Yeah,
and so we've had reasonably crowded, but if it's that crowded, then we have to have people who understand a lot more about what they're doing and what the measurement means, okay? And there certainly is, people don't create the low frequency sounds, so if we see a big difference between low and high,
yeah, you know.
then we know that the club's creating X amount of sound. If we know that it's similar, then that's crowd sound.
Well, what about like idling cars and things like that? Is that the scene?
On Bourbon Street, Island,
I don't know, I mean, cars like traffic or whatever,
Yeah, but this is strictly gonna be for BCU.
This is just Bourbon Street
This is
and the
just
little
Bourbon
stretch of Decatur.
No, that's okay, it's a good, no, no question. Listen, what is it they say, ask a question, be a fool for 5 minutes, don't ask a question, be a fool for a lifetime?
Oh, that's true.
Well,
Okay.
I ask a question every 5 minutes.
Okay.
I got a question that's not exactly relevant to decibels right now.
Wait, say that again?
A question that's not exactly relevant to decibels. But
Okay,
we have a list of the bars that you're measuring.
right.
Robert's organization, Urban Street League, French Quarter, has 61 members. You begin to
Not
know-
my organization.
Well, let it roll.
We should remember of
We
it.
begin to have a quantity, way of quantification of what we call emanating or sources
Mhm.
of sound. And a lot of this is complaint driven from receivers of sound. Do we have any quantification of, and even the people walking, with a little bit of statistical play, like I said, we could find out how many people like it and how many people don't, what percentage. That wouldn't be hard to do if we did an interview. Right? But how many residential receiving properties are really in range of the 3 blocks or so of Bourbon Street that are allowed? Is it 50 or 100 or 500?
Well,
Can really be impacted by that? Do we know?
Well, I would say that the point is that there are residences right at 181 or 100 feet from the corner. So we're
Down side street.
right on the side streets. I think that would be,
As much as 80 feet or 100 feet away.
right.
So we could count up how many
Yeah, I
can be
think,
impacted by it. And then we could look at how many people mind it and how many
I
don't.
think what we're doing is we're setting it so to protect these people as much as possible. And I started out with 180 feet as my distance, half a block, because there's a number of half a block sections, and then there's some that are shorter. So I started with a half a block, and then I had a pretty conservative estimate, and then so that means that people are protected really maybe up into that point.
Right.
And then we deal with complaints, and we have to deal with, and we get to specific problems that might occur that cannot be taken care of with this first step. Then we have to find ways to accommodate that. I think you're right. If there is no complaint, then we don't have to worry about that particular thing. But
Right.
that's, I wouldn't model it. I wouldn't model it based on the fact that there is a complaint. There's no complaint now at that place. There might be some later because there's a shift. There's always a potential shift in programming of the place, ownership, programming, and who's the resident. So you have three or so factors that you basically need to have something in place that prevents that from one of those shifts from happening and all of a sudden creating a problem.
Okay, but.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but it sounds like we don't know the population. We know the square feet.
Yeah, I think that would be,
That are
the
involved.
problem is we're going to be evaluating with sound management, the number of complaints, going to keep track of those things so we'll be able to figure out where the problems are and solve those problems. That would be the goal of it, ultimately. Not of this moment right now, but ultimately when they get the management program going. So I would just,
I would think even so, I can see you don't like.
But I'll give you a slightly different perspective on that. Even in the first 3 blocks of Bourbon Street, the 100, 200, 300 blocks, we don't have residents on the cross streets, but we have very large hotels.
right.
And the hotel owners have told us that they regard themselves as residential users and that they want their guests to have quiet during periods of time when they would normally be sleeping. And so when we look at a series of regulations, we have to take the case of the most vulnerable group of people, and we have to have laws that protect them and give them a reasonable expectation of quiet enjoyment, even if there's no complaint. And that's been the premise that we're working on, is what is a reasonable compromise that we can make to ensure that people generally have quiet places to sleep during sleeping hours and otherwise. And that's why you can't just make it on a complaint-driven basis. It has to be also on what is a reasonable standard that you can put in place.
Right. I'm not against that, and I'm not looking for the complaints. But we have quantities of clubs, quantities of decibels. A lot of things are being quantified. But not how many residential, including hotels, sites or people can be impacted by this. There's no number for that.
Bob, the other thing is that the hotels have a no refund policy. People complain and they say, well, we can't move you or we can move you. This is how they work it, but they don't, there's only one place over by by the waterfront. There's the large, never mind, I can't remember the name of the building now, but they have a refund policy. They're the only one that I know of, but they have plenty of complaints. So I think that knowing that those exist, knowing that there are residents that are complaining, the idea is just put this and see how well this takes, because we think that it'll be a significant improvement in the situation, and then have the complaint management system to come in and deal with specific complaints that somehow, if we have an outlier, we have a way to deal with it, and we can figure out how to solve that problem. And I don't know that if we drive it on complaints, we don't really have a good complaint record right now. That's the problem. So we don't, we need to develop that to better understand, and then if we have to, reiterate what we've done. Does that make sense? I mean, there has a little bit of science and a little bit of trial and error. That's what it is. It's a mixture of those two things. So,
I think more towards the question that Bob was asking in the first place, when we had a meeting of the FMIA zoning committee, the couple that owns the building that the bookstore's in, Charters and Frenchman, was there, and they live upstairs. And they were some of the most vocal people about enjoying the sounds of Frenchman Street and enjoying the fact that they live there and that this is all grown up around them. And they love the life of the street. I think you're going to find there's people in proximity to Bourbon Street that feel the same way. And I think it's important that we do quantify what all the residents really think.
right.
And as for the hotels, well, the rooms at Sonesta that are based on Bourbon Street and have balconies are the most expensive rooms in the house.
Right.
So there are people that want this in hotels, in residences.
Sure. I understand. I think we're. I'm sorry. I had a thought for you a second ago. It's okay, if those people can move closer to those sources, that's great, but I think there's just got to be a limit there, and that's all. Again, coming back to the same thing, we're just putting a limit on it.
Yeah, I think quantifying the residents and their opinions is important.
Yeah. Oh, matter of fact.
That might be a useful piece of information to know, but that's not going to answer all the questions, because the sound